Hello and welcome to everyone who is joining us for this panel. Welcome to all of you who have been in the previous one and are still joining us now. Now, when I say big innovations in health, what comes to mind? Feel free to call out. I'm going to start. Artificial intelligence. Anything else from our panel? What comes to mind when we talk about big innovations in health? 3D printing. Anything else? Artificial intelligence, absolutely. The truth is that we could spend the whole Change Now conference talking about big innovations in health, but what we've done for you today is take a snapshot of some of the most innovative work that's happening right now, work that's we know will contribute to the health revolution, both for the next generation and the generations to come. Now, to kick off this session, I'm happy to welcome our very first panel. Joining me here on this stage, we have Frédéric Vacher, Head of Innovation at 3D Experience Lab. That's Dassault Systèmes' Open Innovation Laboratory and Startup Accelerator. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone.
Also joining us, Matthieu de Beule, CEO and co-founder of FEOPS. FEOPS uses cutting-edge technology to transform cardiac images into digital twins. That's virtual copies of the heart. We'll hear more on that later, but thanks for being here, Matthieu.
Yep, nice being here, thank you.
And finally, also pleased to have with us Ziad Rouag, President and CEO of Biomedics, which uses 3D printing technology to conduct advanced physician training and rehearsals, ultimately reducing patient risk. Many thanks for being here.
Thanks. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to start with Frédéric, though, because you lead a lab with innovation in its DNA. What trends are you seeing in the area of health, and how has it evolved in recent years?
Yeah, you know, at Dassault Systèmes, we virtualize the world. Historically, the products, very complex products, such as planes, cars, but also a very simple product, almost everything around you. And we started with a medical device in this sector. Most of the medical devices are completely designed, engineered in 3D with our solutions. And we see a lot of extensions from that. First, we go from the device by itself to the experience, so that you not only see and experience the product, but only the procedure within the context. And for instance, just last week, we did announce a world premiere, which is a Vortex, a simulation center in virtual reality within an hospital, Hartman Institute, so that the patient can live the radiotherapy treatment in VR before having the real treatment, so he can be distressed.
So when you say live the treatment, could you tell us what would happen to that patient then?
Putting an headset,
yep.
A VR headset, and he's visiting the room, he's experiencing and looking at the robot, which is kind of impressive, and then he's laying down on the bed, and he sees the treatment in action, so that he can be distressed. So from product to experience. Also, what we are doing is we are investing a lot in the molecule design at the molecular level for all the pharmaceutical industry, so that they can do what we do historically in the industries, such as plane, cars, and so on, but for a molecule. Inventing, designing, certifying, and now doing all the clinical trials on a cloud platform. And in the mix, you have the human. So we virtualize the human bodies. And at the lab, we started with organs, so that we can connect either the medical device or the implants with the patient-specific organ. So we started with a project called Living Art Project. It was 8 years ago, with the objective to represent in the digital world the art behavior. So not only the 3D model of the art, but all the behaviors and the physical properties of the organ, so that we can use this organ as a research project and then create some user scenarios. But from that, now what we can do is we can do patient-specific organs from the medical imaging, so that you have the virtual twin of the patient in the virtual world, so that you can do a lot of things. And my colleagues will speak about it as they are accelerated with our 3D Experience Lab program in those sectors.
Well, then I will turn to Matthieu, because we've just heard a little bit about what we can do in terms of the heart and making a virtual twin. Could you just tell us a bit back about your work? It started as a research project. How did you realize that this could be something much bigger?
Yes, correct. So thank you. Like Frédéric said, we started by the support of Dassault of, let's say, transforming medical images into a personalized computer model of that patient. And why we did it and why we did it for the heart is that today 1 in 3 persons die of cardiovascular disease. And this is leading cause of death worldwide, and this will remain like that for the coming years. So this is a very global charge on the healthcare system. What we see now is a lot of these therapies are minimally invasive, meaning if a physician treats a heart, they don't open the chest anymore, but they make small incisions in the thigh, and then they go with small wires in place to implant devices. Now, the biggest challenge there is that the physician doesn't see the heart anymore, so he has to rely on medical images to make very important decisions on what implant size, what implant position is optimal for a particular patient. And what we have done is we have used these medical images, we have transformed them in a computer model, and we can test these different scenarios up front in order to provide insights to the physician that helps him select the correct implant for the correct patient. And like that, we can make these procedures more efficient and also more safer for the patient.
So we're making digital versions of ourselves that then are going to help better patient outcomes because the physicians have better information.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
If I've summarized right. Now, Frédéric, you oversee the 3D Experience Lab program, which I believe Ziad was also a part of. Explain how you accelerate some of this disruptive innovation.
It's a project that we started, an initiative started 6 years ago, with the objective of taking startups very early stage, startup that disrupt and that really impacts the society. So we are on all fronts, not only life science, but also energy, mobility, and we have a lot of projects, but we are very selective. And what we do is we provide them access to our solutions, to our platforms, but not only. We connect them with some mentors, some experts that will help them to industrialize their project. And we can also help them to scale, to go abroad, to connect with industrials. As you know, we are in 140 countries. We cover 11 industries. So more or less, we know most of the industrials worldwide. And for a startup, it's very key to have the right contact at the right time. So for instance, with BIOMODEX, we help them to go in Boston, to settle them and to connect with the local ecosystems. So it's not only a technology accelerator, but it's really an accelerator for success to the company. And when we met first time, Ziad, with the first team, the guys were 2. So it's not, you know, the picture 2 in the garage, but almost. And now, how many people are you, Ziad?
23.
Yeah, 23. So in 4 years, it's a very interesting ramp up.
Can you tell us a bit about how you started out? Where were you working? Not in the garage, but when you met Frédéric and his team, and also how being part of this program has helped, but also what work you do.
Great. Well, thank you. So Biomedics was started as an idea, a basic concept of, okay, there's digital twins. Now let's see if we can make physical twins, because in the world of transcatheter procedures, what Matthieu was talking about earlier, these positions today, there's less and less surgery and more catheter-based procedures, which requires you to make small incisions, come in with a catheter, use all kinds of navigation and imaging modalities to be able to treat a patient. So we had the digital component, it exists. There's some elements there. You can take measurements and so on. FEOPS, for example, takes it to the next level. We decided as a company to say, okay, you've got the digital twin. Now let's try to do something that's actually haptic, meaning something that you can print, that you can feel as you're advancing a catheter system through it, a guide wire, a dilator, or whatever system, or an implant. The interventionalist has to feel with his hands at the level of the groin, effectively, something that's happening within the heart, right? So you have about a meter and a half of wire, and you have to feel it with the tip of your fingers. Well, how do you do that on a digital model? Well, you can't. So we would print the digital model, and then you effectively give that to the physician, put it into a system, pressurize it, and then have the physician use that digital model to rehearse a procedure or to train on a procedure.
And we see live what Ziad is saying, is what you can see with the colors is the artery of the patient. In white, it's the cartridge, which is 3D printed, and that is inserted into this gray base station in which you put a liquid having the same property than the blood, and it creates a test bed so that the surgeon can train, and he will train on your own aneurysm. Each patient is having his own cartridge.
So patient-specific.
It is. So every cartridge is in itself patient-specific. But we do, some of these cartridges are used for training by companies when they launch a new product, or when they want to do clinical trials, or they use it for R&D validation, and sometimes now to replace animal studies. So there's many, many applications for the technology. There's also case-specific when you have very complex patient cases, a risk of mortality or morbidity. We have more and more companies and physicians coming to us and saying, look, this is a dangerous case. I want to rehearse that specific case before I touch the patient. And so you have two real modalities: training, which is new technologies you're learning all the time, and then you've got the super complex cases that people will want to rehearse on.
And do you have any data on, how rehearsing helps? Like, do we know that it actually makes a difference?
That's a very good question. So we do. We have a number of peer-reviewed publications that have come out over the last 2-3 years. We have a data set from a major French hospital in Rennes showing the impact in neurovascular procedures, so with patients that have an aneurysm. Pre-treating those patients or rehearsing those patients, like you see on this particular cartridge here, before doing the real case has a real impact. And when you have aneurysms, time is important. And it's even more important when you have stroke cases. So the more prepared you are in navigating where to put a stent and so on and so forth, the more likely you're going to have better outcomes in the actual procedure. So the data is now beginning to compile. There's obviously more need for research and more larger studies, but intuitively, I think everybody understands the more preparations you have, the better you're likely to have better outcomes.
Now, I understand both of you were part of the 3D lab experience, if that's right. Can you tell me, both of you, perhaps how that did? Matthieu, you were as well part of the. Yes.
Sure.
How it helped you? What was the biggest help for you? Just so I understand, and kind of how these kind of systems help startups. When they're 2 people, you were, and how big were you when you?
Well, we were a bit bigger at that moment. I think we were about 15 at that.
Okay. All right. Perhaps starting with you, Matthieu.
Yeah, with pleasure. So I think one of the biggest advantages we have of working together with Frédéric and his team is that on the one side, they have the best technology out there. I mean, with the simulations that we are doing, these are that complex to mimic real living tissue behavior. I don't think there's any other software out there that is able to tackle these problems. So having access to the technology, having their experts helping us and guiding us, and as Frédéric also said, introducing us into their network has helped significantly at our end.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the software component is huge. Basically, we use similar softwares, both of us, within the 3DS family. Katia is a major piece of software. There's also SolidWorks. And of course, we use a different software for FEA work and material analysis. That's also a Dassault system software, an extremely sophisticated software. So first of all, without that, you can't do what we do. It's impossible. And then, of course, there's the whole logistical environment from Dassault and 3DS that helps smaller companies, like Frédéric was speaking earlier, helping us set up, for example, in Boston, giving us contacts initially, sort of kind of putting us up on our feet, and then we could run with it.
How do you go about identifying the candidates for your lab project?
We use a lot of data. We develop a data intelligence dashboard so that we can radar all the newcomers. We radar all the 17 SDGs so that to cover, a broad scope. Mm-hmm. We obviously go into events like this one, like Change Now. But we also have partners, incubator partners all around the world. We partner with the best in class, with the MIT, with Berkeley, with Centec in Canada, in Paris, with Polytechnic or HEC. We have partners everywhere. We rely on our internal network because at Dassault Systèmes, we are almost 23,000 people in many countries. So in case they have a dinner and they meet an interesting startup, they automatically in our community. So we have a communities platform so that we can interact all around the world and share, our informations.
In terms of patient outcomes or changes in patient outcomes, what are we talking about? Are these incremental changes? It's going to be a little bit better, or are we talking about radical transformations in the healthcare system? Perhaps starting with you, Frédéric.
It brings radical changes. For instance, I was talking about the living heart model. It was the first digital model certified by the FDA. Because all what we do in the virtual world needs to be certified, right? And it's brand new. And everything we do in terms of simulation needs to be certified. For the patient, it's improving the patient journey. I'm not saying that every one of us will have his virtual clone, you know. I don't believe it's a right idea. But in terms of organ specifics, when you need a particular surgery, most probably we'll all have our virtual organ so that it will be used for simulation, for training, for planification of the surgery, up to implant. And we accelerate projects in India, for instance, for facial surgery, which is usually very complex. The startup called Lucy Implant, they scan the bones of the patient. They design in 3D the patient-specific implant. And then they do the surgery with the implant that has been 3D printed. So it's huge because it's the exact implant morphology that match the patient morphology.
And how you talked about we would all be having digital representations of our organs. When is that for? That's I've got a surgery in a couple of weeks. Is it?
We'll need to scan yourself.
No, I don't imagine I did. But realistically, when are we? How far are these time frames for this, Matthieu, for example?
Today, they are in production with those technologies.
Yeah. So to the question whether this is disruptive. I definitely want to make that statement because if you look at what have been done today, if you look at these medical images that are used for planning, what they have been doing for the last 10, 15, 20 years is you take these images, you measure on these images what the size of that patient is, and based on that you need to decide what implant size will I select for that patient. Now this is pretty challenging because if you put a device in a patient, this device deforms, the anatomy deforms, and if you make the wrong choice, you can have life-threatening complications. So if you look at actual usage, because as you said, when is this available? Today. So if you have a surgery tomorrow, we can help you today, where we can take your CT scan, we can make a computer model of your heart, and we can then challenge or model different treatment scenarios. And what we have observed is that, for example, in some of these produce on average 1.4 devices per patient, meaning that they make measurements, they try a device, if it doesn't work, they take it out again, they put a new one in, which is of course not efficient. With our technology, we can bring it down to one. Same thing with contrast being used, the time of the procedure, this is all going down. So this is happening today as we speak, and we will only further improve it as we go.
Is that the same with you, Ziad?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the end of the day, and I'll give you an example. I mean, CTs done on patient is not that old. And today, that is the complete standard of care. We're taking this CT technology, which is the basis of what we use, we digitize it, we segment it, we use these digital images, and then we are able to do two things. I mean, FEOPS, that's its own thing with the digital part, we do the physical part. So there is a bit of a symbiotic relation between the two. But I personally think in the future, if you're going to have a complex medical procedure, right, having an aneurysm dealt with or a valve put in, this technology is going to be so available and so common that almost every patient will have its procedures pre-planned and prepared in either digital format or physical format or a combination of the two, which will completely reduce these risks, or at least reduce them as far as possible. So we think really this could become the standard of care.
And all this is available on the cloud platform, so that you can expect to have, remote advices on planning. For instance, your specialist is in Paris or in London, and he will help, some local surgeons that are in Africa or wherever, and they can connect on the virtual model of the patient on the cloud in a secured environment.
Wow, so it's kind of mixing different technologies, different, combining.
Exactly. On this could be accessible from your smartphone, so you can imagine, how far it can go.
Right now, we're talking a lot about innovation that's looking at fixing problems. I've got a problem, I need a surgery. Could we eventually go further and use some of this technology as a bit of an alert system to, identify potential problems? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if anyone...
No, of course you can, and that's again the beauty of having this cloud-based technology is the power is in the data that you're gathering, because the more data sets you gather, the more insights you get on these diseases, the more insights you get on how these diseases are progressing. And I envision within, let's say, 2, 3, 4 years from now, that based on the CT scan at day 1, we will be able to predict what the right time is to treat a particular patient with which technology, and maybe also by whom. So this is definitely coming. I mean, sure.
Yeah, I totally agree because we're developing so much data right now, and to feed algorithms, you need data. So now we're getting these libraries of cases, how they're prepared, how they're planned, what the results look like. And you have enough data, you can move into a predictive algorithm world. So that's coming. That's a few years away. So imagine you're a patient that has a regular anatomy. If you have a CT, for example, or a scan of a particular valve or something, we think, at least I believe, that with the data that's being developed today, we'll be able to make some predictions whether you're going to develop some kind of a heart disease problem or valve disease problem, and so the prediction capacity is going to just increase.
True, and I think the COVID pandemic was a very strong accelerator. I guess now everyone is familiar with Moderna or BioNTech, those type of names that were unknown 5 years ago. And they all, developed and have done their clinical trials on the cloud, on our platforms. And it's one of the reasons why they succeeded to do it online, because, at that time, everyone, was supposed to be at home. So it was not possible to gather a cohort of patients and bring them to an hospital, physically. So everything was done on the cloud in a secured environment.
You talk about COVID-19 pandemic. It reminded us that our health system can be vulnerable, but it also is spurred incredible innovation in the same way the climate is spurring innovation in the environmental sector. Are these kinds of crises, in fact, healthy for innovation?
It was. I'll give you another example. At the beginning of the pandemic, we did not know how the virus was spreading, if it was air spreading or not. So we first started with my American colleagues on the MIT to create a model of the flow and to have a sneeze of a virtual patient with the COVID particles, the same size. The first, it was to optimize the protections, the face shields and so on, and to better understand at which distance we should recommend 2% to be in front of. But then, when the pandemic started to arrive in Europe, we first had a hospital in France. It was at the east of France. They were having COVID infected patient. They were, putting all the protections. All the doctors were heavily protected. They were separated with other patients. And even with that, everyone was infected and they could not understand. So we started to do airflow simulation. So taking some solvers that were used in the aeronautics, for airplanes, or in automobile to optimize the CX of the car, in order to understand the propagation of the virus within an hospital. And we run the solvers, and they really immediately show and understood what was the issue. And to give you
what was the issue? Tell us.
very simple issue and very easy to change. They were a big corridor, and in the corridor, they were the coffee machine on the water, So the doctors were leaving the patient room, leaving their protection to drink a coffee, and they were infected because of the airflow. So all what we do is not a game, and what you have seen is a virtual twin or a virtual experience that is scientifically conformed to the reality. So when we did this with the hospital, we were taking, obviously, all the floor plan to put everything in 3D, but all the pressure, temperature, doors, windows, air conditioner, ventilation systems, to put all this in a model and to run the computation to understand how it goes in the virtual world.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. I mean, the fundamental thing is necessity is the mother of invention. So, COVID was a major crisis, but it allowed some things to be created, develop these new RNA vaccines, for example. I mean, that's not just for COVID. I mean, we're going to see a revolution in vaccines and for all kinds of different issues out there. And I think for us, during the COVID, we all had to adapt, whether it's Dassault, whether it's FEOPS or us. We went a lot more digitals. At the beginning of COVID, the hospitals were shut down for anything elective procedure. Everybody is dealing with COVID. So we had to adapt. We had to go online. And many of the companies were effectively using our products to teach physicians remotely. So they'd send them the product. They would have Zoom calls. Physicians would actually use the product remotely. They'd have camera systems. So humanity is extremely adaptive, even though we can hit some, crises and bumps here and there. So this particular one has allowed a lot of people to adapt.
And I guess we could say that the crisis, the health crisis at the moment in terms of heart disease is a crisis. Is that, in a longer form crisis, COVID was an acute crisis, if you will, that lasted 3 years. But, the crisis of obesity is something that's driving innovation as well. That's, what you're answering to with some of your projects.
That's true. In each crisis, you have innovations, and we found, a lot, even if it was a difficult period of time for most of us. Yeah.
I'd like to thank our three panelists, Frédéric, Matthieu, and Ziad, for your comments and candid explanations of your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll leave it there.